Thank you very much, Sir Graham, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, sir. Honourable members taking part in this debate today will recognise that this is not the first time that we have sought assurances from the UK government that it is sincerely committed to supporting the British steel industry. Indeed, by my calculations, since 2015, Labour MPs have secured 19 debates and urgent questions on steel, made 51 speeches on steel, asked 54 oral questions on steel, and intervened on or responded to ministers 103 times on the future of our steel industry. Now, a pessimist may ask, what's the point? After all this pressure, the British steel industry is still facing a range of very serious challenges, and the UK government is continually failing to provide the level of support needed, which would allow the UK steel sector to compete. But in spite of these powerful headwinds, I am optimistic about the future of our steel industry, because I believe that COVID-19 has completely reset the way in which the British people think about the sort of country that they want to live in. The public want a Britain that can stand on its own 2 feet, and that is more resilient to external shocks. The pandemic has exposed the weakness and the vulnerabilities that lie at the heart of our economy and our society. And the pandemic has demonstrated beyond a shadow of doubt that if we wish to address those weaknesses and vulnerabilities, then we must commit to and invest in a renaissance of modern manufacturing in our country. British manufacturing has been in decline, dropping from 30% of GDP in the 1970s to just 9% today. And the UK's shift towards a city-centric, service-based economy means it is now the most geographically unequal country in Northern Europe. We have the richest area in the whole of Northern Europe, London, but also the 5 least prosperous, with West Wales and the Valleys the poorest of all. So today our country stands at a fork in the road, and the choice is clear. Are we going to continue to allow our manufacturing sector to wither away, constantly eroded by the sort of policies that have come to define the last decade, and which are advocated in the Business Secretary's book, Britannia Unchained? Let the market rip. Let the City of London call the shots. Let globalisation and deindustrialisation ride roughshod over our communities. Or are we going to truly understand the pandemic as a clear and unambiguous warning that we cannot go back to business as usual, and that we must strive for real, enduring change? That we must stand on our own 2 feet by reducing our dangerous over-reliance on imports from China. That it's time to recognise that the collapse of British manufacturing is the primary cause of the grotesque inequality that exists between the wealthiest and the poorest regions of our country. And that a modern manufacturing renaissance is our only route towards a fair and just transition to a cleaner, greener future. Sir Graham, our manufacturing base can only be rebuilt if it is based on a strong and healthy steel industry, because steel is a vital foundational industry that is critical for our security, for our prosperity, and for our green resilience. Our economic and national security are underpinned by steel. Every military vehicle, every major infrastructure project, and every power station requires steel. And in a world where strategic competition between democracies and dictatorships is intensifying on an almost daily basis, it is absolutely crucial that as much of that steel as possible is produced here in the UK. Our prosperity as a nation is also dependent on steel as a vital foundational industry that feeds into our entire manufacturing sector. Steel jobs are good jobs, paying an average annual salary of £36,000, which is 36% higher than the Welsh average. And the Port Talbot Steelworks in my Aberavon constituency provides 4,000 such jobs, alongside thousands more through the supply chains. Homegrown steel is also the only route to tackling climate change. Steel will play a critical role in greening our economy by building the electric cars of the future and providing vital components for solar, wind and tidal power. Moreover, British production processes have half the carbon footprint of China's far less decarbonised steel industry, and shipping steel from the other side of the world is obviously more carbon intensive. So Graham, whether you look at the British steel industry through the prism of our national security, of our regional prosperity, or of our planetary sustainability, you draw the same conclusion. There can be no sustainable post-pandemic economic recovery without a strong and healthy steel industry. The arguments are compelling, irrefutable and overwhelming, so it is difficult to understand why the UK government has been so slow to act. But the pandemic has put rocket boosters on the need for a modern manufacturing renaissance underpinned by the rebirth of our steel industry. So the government must now take the following steps. First, it must reject the recommendation of the Trade Remedies Investigation Directorate regarding steel safeguards, and it must ensure that all 19 of the safeguards remain in place. These trade defence measures were put in place in order to guard against import surges caused by President Trump's Section 232 tariffs, and it is absolutely essential they are retained until such time as the 232 tariffs are dropped by the Biden administration. The TRID's recommendations are tantamount to dismantling the flood defences just as the tidal wave is about to hit. Will the Minister therefore today assure us that she has made the position of the steel industry, steel unions and steel MPs clear to her colleagues in the Department for International Trade? Second, the government must, as a matter of urgency, address the issue of our industrial energy prices. British steel makers are paying 86% more than their German competitors and 62% more than the French. Over the past 5 years, this disparity has cost the UK steel industry an additional £254 million. These additional costs represent funds that should and would have been directed towards critical capital investment, including decarbonisation projects. Can the Minister please therefore assure us today that her department is truly committed to tackling the root causes of the UK's astronomical industrial energy prices, and can she please set out her urgent action plan for doing so? Third, we need a patriotic procurement policy. It is absurd and inexcusable that the Ministry of Defence is buying Type 26 frigates for the Royal Navy that are built with Swedish steel. We need procurement that gives the right weighting to local value. Let's look at big opportunities such as HS2 with 2 million tonnes of steel. But how much of that steel is going to be British? Can the Minister assure us today that every government department and HS2 will be signed up to the Steel Charter by the end of this calendar year? Fourth, we need a government that is truly committed to rebuilding our manufacturing base and which believes in partnering with industry to do so. Some say that steel is a sunset industry, but nothing could be further from the truth. It is at the cutting edge of innovation. Indeed, the vast majority of the alloys that are used in steel these days didn't even exist 10 years ago. And it is utterly absurd to have a government that has utterly failed to support the orb in Newport, and here I look to my colleague, which could play a major role in electric vehicles. It seems that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, which is precisely why coordinating forums such as the Industrial Strategy Council are so important. Can the Minister please explain why the Industrial Strategy Council has been closed down by the Business Secretary? And can she please tell us whether she thinks that this decision will be a help or a hindrance in terms of the future of the British steel industry? Sir Graham, British steel workers are a strong, proud community of men and women who make the best steel that money can buy. They are certainly not looking for anybody's charity. or for special treatment or favours. They are simply seeking the opportunity to compete without having one hand tied behind their backs. They are simply asking for a level playing field. But successive Conservative governments since 2010 have let them down by leaving the floodgates open to heavily subsidised imports from China, by failing to close the energy gap, the price gap, by declining to develop a patriotic procurement policy, and by failing to grasp the vital role that a homegrown steel industry must play in driving forward the green industrial revolution. Sir Graham, receiving a fair day's pay for a fair day's work is as important to steelworkers as it is to every other working person across the length and breadth of our country. But working people are motivated by far more than money. They are driven, above all, by the sense of pride and dignity that their work gives them. And steelworkers are certainly not an exception to that rule. They do long shifts in challenging conditions because they want to make a contribution. They are fiercely proud of the fact that steel is the basis of the houses that we live in, the offices that we work in, and the cars that we drive. They are steel workers because they want to do their bit for their country, for their communities, and for their families. They are steel workers because they want to be part of something bigger. But they can't do this alone. They need a government that will back them to the hilt. They need a government that will put policies in place that attract investment rather than drive it away. A government that truly believes that our country should be able to stand on its own 2 feet. Our steelworkers need a government that is genuinely committed to reversing the decline of manufacturing in this country. They need a government that is truly invested in swinging the pendulum from cities to towns, and from London and the South East to the rest of the country. Britain needs its steel, Sir Graham, and our steel workers need a government that is on their side. Thank you. I'd like to thank all of the honourable members present for what I think has been a really constructive and useful debate. I thank the Minister for her response, but I have to say I'm afraid that there is a chasm between the rhetoric that the government is deploying and the tangible actions that we need to see. On safeguards, this is now of the utmost urgency, and we are in an absurd situation whereby the Secretary of State for Trade is not being given the option of modifying these recommendations. It's simply take it or leave it, and if the decision is to reject them in their entirety, then all of the safeguards fall, and that really would lead to a massive import surge which could be crippling for our industry. So I urge the Minister to go back to the Department for International Trade with the greatest urgency. The recommendations appear to be based on a fundamental understanding about how the steel industry actually works, as the Honourable Member for Scunthorpe so eloquently set out. On procurement, we need concrete actions. We need targets for how much steel should be in public infrastructure projects, how much of that has to be British steel, and we need clear supply chain plans so that the procurers are obliged to set out precisely how they're going to maximise the input of British steel. We've been calling for this for years, and we need to see those specific actions. On price disparity, looking at the French-German model for network cost reductions, looking at increasing the renewable levy exemptions, providing exemptions from capacity market costs. These are all things, again, which we've been calling for several years. And finally, on the green transition, a recent think tank report, Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit, showed that there are 23 hydrogen steel projects happening across the European Union, absolutely none in this country. So it really feels we could be behind the curve there as well. Politics is about choices, Sir Graham. I urge the government to take choices which actually favour our British steel industry. Thank you.